Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love.
Welcome to another episode of the How Men Cry podcast. I go by the name of Dxtr Spits, and today on How Men Cry, as always, we just look to get guys talking comfortably about vulnerability and mental health. Currently on a journey of finding 1,000 men to tell their stories, whether in podcast form or through story submissions on our social media, where you can submit a picture with a brief story about a time that you cried or had to show vulnerability. Now, today, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome a good buddy, especially of one of the producers of How Men Cry, Mr. Andy Swindler. How you doing today?
Doing all right. Enjoying the warmth here while we still have it.
Yeah, right. I'm literally looking out like I was gonna do some in the house stuff to kind of decompress today, but I'm like, no, I might need to get out and run because it's
yeah. Save that for December. That's
I'm like it's very limited. But no, thank you for taking the time out and for coming to chat. I actually appreciate that. We initially talked was probably it was months ago now.
A couple months ago.
Yeah, when we were first kind of starting to bring more of this together to be released. So, happy to kind of bring you back into the convo in a live form.
So. Really happy to be here. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, for sure. So would you like to just give a brief intro of, who you are and some of the things that you work on?
Sure. So, my name's Andy Swindler. I live in Chicago on the north side. And where to begin? Maybe I'll work backwards. So right now I have a startup called Feel Real, and we are really focused in so far in kind of a research way of what is the impact of small group dialogue spaces, particularly on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. They focus quite a bit on training, and that's important, but we don't see as much emphasis on how do we build communities of practice over time. We've interviewed a lot of people, and one of the consultants we interviewed said, I can't undo 50 years of programming in 1 hour. And I think that one quote not only kind of highlights a lot of what Feel Real stands for and believes in, but also me and my work as well in my own journey. So I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, and prior to Feel Real, I did about 5 years as a coach and consultant with a really specific methodology around purpose. And you could say intuitive guidance, intuitive wisdom. Some people may use the language, more of the feminine spirit or the compassionate spirit. And I think, that may be a little bit of a tease for this conversation, just in terms of what is going on with men and maybe what is missing in many cases, and there's lots of reasons for that. And so it gave me, and part of the reason I went into that is I looked in the mirror. I actually had, after a breakup, and then that had followed the winding down of a business that I had had for 14 years that was at the end very, very challenging on many levels, emotional, financial, and everything else. And after that breakup, in 2015, I looked in the mirror and I didn't like what I saw. I had, jealousy was coming up in the relationship and various things. And, thankfully, I don't know, a lot of people refer to the dark night of the soul. I think I had several nights, but, and in different areas of life, right? Like relationship, business, all these things. And thankfully it did. It gave me the motivation to say, there's got to be another way. There's got to be something. So it kind of shook me. And then I just started with basic. I like, oh, let me look at my nutrition. Let me look at my fitness. That's when I started studying mindfulness, and that led me to meeting a lot of the people that led to going really deep. I mean, I essentially sort of took myself back to college and designed a curriculum. I like this term. Some people call it a mystery school, like when we do the deeper work or the consciousness work and the healing work. And so I've been on that journey, and I've just met so many amazing people, including you. And I'll pause there.
No, that's awesome. I mean, and it's really it's great to even just hear even more of that insight. Some, some of which I'd heard, but also some new info in there. And I think that's really crucial, like of kind of having that point of just saying, hey, like I really just had to look in the mirror, because I had a very similar circumstance where it's almost like when you start to look into in the mirror, and then you start to not really recognize who you are, in ways, or just that feeling of like kind of knowing that you're off balance. So it's great that you took that time to actually do something different, because sometimes people just dig further in. So
Right.
that was a pretty big crossroad. So congrats on that. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I had access to a huge array of support, which I consider a blessing and a privilege. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so where do you hope to see your work go now? What's your, I guess, long term, vision around these conversations, or kind of bringing people together in the way that you do?
Yeah, it's interesting. I find myself always bouncing between scale in some very abstract way, like global, humanity. And
Yeah.
I've even been questioning some of those words lately because they're so abstract. Who am I to like make a judgment of humanity? Billions of people and all that.
Yeah.
And actually, one thing that's led me to in the last, I don't know, year and a half in Chicago is I remember in the summer of 2020, in the early pandemic, looking around and saying, gosh, yeah, I'm doing, because we were doing a lot of this work on Zoom and remotely, even before it was cool. And uh, so it's by nature geographically dispersed. It's all over the
Hmm.
place. And I thought so much of this is basically boils down to like how are we cultivating and planting the seeds, but also really cultivating over time and nurturing our relationships, both our
Hmm.
relationships with ourselves and our relationships with each other, and then how are we building really strong communities from that. And it's fascinating how that kind of aligns with I would consider myself a technologist. That's what
Hmm.
most of my entrepreneurial work has been around. So I'm fascinated with, I mean, I most of us probably have some awareness that technology is hurting us in many ways, just the way it's being commoditized. If you watch things like The Social Dilemma, that they're,
Hmm.
the evolution of things that I got really excited about, more than a decade ago. Social media, wow, like everybody gets a voice, we can democratize, access to things. And it's like,
Oh.
well, the digital divide is real. Social media
Yeah.
becomes a huge advertising network, and
Yeah.
it's even worse than that. It's really insidious, and I'm
Hmm.
not immune to that. In fact, later tonight I'm going to be facilitating a vulnerable discussion with a men's group about pornography.
Hmm.
It's just, and I think maybe that's a good illustration. I think a lot of us are probably wrestling with a lot of the same kinds of things, but we don't talk about them. And there's this sense of like, oh, I'm all alone, or I'm weird, or I'm a whatever. There's something wrong with me. And at the end of the day, I think it's all about entering every moment. If we can enter every moment from the presence of love, and I think there's a choice to be in joy, and that's actually something I'm also really evaluating in my life. I
Hmm.
think I've slipped a little into maybe like the sort of martyr complex of social justice, of like, well, I've got to just be sort of miserable, and that's not really the game. I think it's
Yeah.
we've got to make space. So that, I was kind of wondering a bit, but to bring that back together, that is Feel Real's mission is, how can we really help people cultivate these relationships and these communities through really deep dialogue spaces, healing spaces, journeys over time that are facilitated by what we call space holders, people who have an extraordinary amount of passion and experience around building energetic containers so that we can feel safe to be seen and heard. And especially in the context of your work, for men to feel like they
Yeah.
have a way to express ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I really, really love it. I mean, I think it is right on time, and I really resonate with the statement of just like individuals maybe feeling like they are, alone, or maybe going through things. Like the fascinating thing around social media in ways is like there's this point of connection where it brings everybody together, and then this point of being isolated, which I think comes from, like almost like subconsciously comparing probably more than what you normally would, because you're just seeing these different things in life. And I think it's like subtle sometimes. It's like, oh, so and so looks so happy. I don't feel that happy. So and so's on vacation. I don't know if I'm on vacation. So, and just saying that may not be everybody's personal journey, but just saying, like, I think the need for people to be able to build in genuine community means, especially just with all the different ups and downs and political back and forths, and just I really feel more and more every day like there's so much noise out there, and it really gets in the way of just like basic human connection of like, hey, hello, how's your day going? Like something really subtle that I really appreciated even when we started this conversation is before we even talked about anything, and I think it was just kind of natural for both you and I, was really like a, hey, how is your day actually going? Like, what is like, and I mean, even before the, stream started, it was like a, hey, how's your day going? What's going, and even, so just saying, I'm really inspired by the work that you're doing. And even just, maybe the sensitivity of topics that you're looking through. And you said you were hosting the event tonight. You said it's based on porn. Is that related to just men, or is that a multi gender combo? I'm just curious.
Excuse me. It is men, and it's even specifically white men. That's been part of my journey, certainly in the last, I'd say, 7 years. I think Ferguson was for me a moment of paying more attention. I'll say, I think awakening is kind of an ongoing process to racial justice, racial injustice, and and it got loud enough for me, to pay attention and say, well, a lot of people just go to judgment and like, oh, it's this and it's that, and people shouldn't do that. And I was like, well, yeah, maybe it's odd people are doing that, but why?
Yeah.
There's a reason beneath that, and I just started digging and learning, and like I said, it's a lifelong journey. But along the way, I found a number of groups. One thing I don't know if I landed before, but with all the challenges of social media and technology, I still really do believe in technology as a way to bring us together. And even what we're doing right now, right? I mean, we've never actually met in person, right? So that's a good example. And so along the way, I've met a number of groups who are convening virtually and really breaking down geographical barriers. One of those groups is called Organizing White Men for Collective Liberation. There's a really strong Chicago. It's intentionally decentralized and kind of loose, so I'll put chapter in quotes.
Sure.
But there's a group of us in Chicago, but this is actually with the national group, and this is, I mean, I think when it comes to healing work in general and trauma and certainly racial justice, I think there's absolutely a need right now for people with like or similar lived experiences to be together, to essentially, just I think there's a degree of similarity and story sharing that can happen, and it's also my understanding, talking to lots of folks, particularly BIPOC folks, is there's very significant harm that can be done with if and I'll just say from my experience specifically, but as white folks are starting to navigate these things and asking questions and starting to, because it can feel really distant and almost academic, and it's not academic, right? It's a lived experience for somebody else, and so it's, I think, very beneficial to have a space to be able to caucus like that and to be there and work together on those things. And that's not the whole story. Because I think that if that was the whole story, then we would be segregated. We would all just be, in our separate spaces. So there's also something to be said for, and I think this is part of Feel Real's mission. I don't know of anybody who's really figured this out. Like, how do we come together after, if we're all kind of in our spaces healing and working on things and learning, what does it look like to integrate beyond
bring
that.
it back.
And so tonight is it's specifically, it's a monthly gathering with OWMCL that is called Internal Liberation, and it's focused on the work of healing ourselves. As a white man, I believe I've received a lot of programming culturally that in order to maintain systems of oppression, I need to be a tool of oppression. I need to be a tool of violence. And some of that's subtle, and that's maybe even the most dangerous and insidious parts are the when the systems of oppression are maintained just through silence, or just going about our days and not paying attention and not ever talking about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's really awesome. And I also like the emphasis on, that part of having separate moments of healing, and then also kind of bringing folk together as well. I think it's a really valuable point. And I think that was actually a lot of the motivation behind not limiting the conversations with How Men Cry to certain pockets of people. Like, I wanted to really do something and have a narrative that would at least, bring a lot of different cultural backgrounds. And I'm not like checking boxes of folks. For the most part, it's pretty much whom is in my network, but just saying that I'm, working on not turning away, stories, and just, allowing different perspectives, because there really is something, if we humble ourselves enough, there's always something that you can learn from somebody's journey, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, have the same or different living experience. There's always something there. So yeah, I think it's all great. It makes me think. So how did you feel like you grew up? Did you have more of like just out of curiosity, like bigger family, smaller family, because it seems like you've really like evaluated a lot of where your life maybe has been and is going now. So what was it like for you growing up?
Yeah. I'm very grateful for my upbringing. I grew up in a small town in Missouri. It's funny, I'm actually driving there next weekend for a high school reunion, so
Nice.
it's fun to check back in and check on my roots, because my family doesn't live there anymore. Both my parents are teachers. My dad was a philosophy professor. My mom was a school teacher and an early childhood specialist, and she also wrote children's books. And it's very stable. They're still together. 51 years, I think, of marriage. And one of the most important things, and I often, if there's ever a discussion where we're talking about privilege, I often, the privilege that's often not listed is just, that is, I think, incredibly important to me, was just having parents who exposed me to so many different things. And it was never heavy-handed. I mean, that's everything from religion to sports to music, which music was the thing that stuck of those three categories.
Yeah.
But they were just, their attitude was like, well, let's just give access to try as many things as possible, and then whatever I truly loved and hopefully had some proficiency at, that's the thing I went with, and then they would continue to support that rather significantly. So for my brother and I, so I have one sibling, one older brother, 3 years older, and he now lives in Chicago, and actually we're at the very final stages of moving my folks to a suburb of Chicago. So for the first time since I was a child, we're actually in the same area, which is really exciting. And I one dimension I'll weave in is just I don't know, long lineage of card carrying Democrats and liberals. So, and especially with them being teachers, I think. So I've started to question that a bit more. I mean, I'm certainly it'd be hard to, excuse me for a second.
Sure.
I don't imagine I would ever flip all the way to the other side, given how deep that is. But for several years would consider myself a progressive, but I think I'm also starting to be a little more critically minded. Just, well, okay, like what it's I think one of the most dangerous things we can do is just assume this one brand or this one branch of particularly politics has all the right answers. It's just far too complex for that. and yet, I do believe in progressive ideals. I believe in the basic idea of progress, the basic idea of we're not there yet. America is not there yet. I believe, actually, I wrote a piece earlier in the year called America for All, and the basic premise was, I really believe in the aspiration of America,
Hmm.
the idealism of America, and I don't think we're ever going to see anything like that until we really reconcile and look at the truth of America. And
Agreed.
we just keep wanting to brush it under the rug. I mean, and I think this was part of the growing up, and my parents probably contributed to this in a way, but it was mostly school. I think the whole system is designed to make all of those things look historical. Like, well, slavery was this really bad thing, but we kind of took care of that. And then we had the civil rights movement, and there's like, it's like there's a couple of things we need to sweep, and it's just,
Yeah,
I don't think that's
we
true.
try to tidy it up. We like,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
don't think that's true. Like, I
yeah,
think, yes, we've made progress. I want to be able to hold, and I think this is a huge thing about these spaces and this idea of being compassionate and coming from a place of love, is being able to hold both truths and say, you know what, we have made progress, certainly, I think demonstrably in a lot of areas, and there's still a long, long way to go. And
yeah,
I dream of a world where we can have more critical conversations and hold both of those. And a lot of that has to do with emotional intelligence. A lot of that has to do
absolutely.
with, like, recognizing when are we triggered, why are we triggered, why do we feel threatened. And this is very true across the board of white men. Is a lot of the work we're trying to do to untangle this, is like, it can feel like we're being threatened or attacked, right? If people are just pointing out privilege or pointing out history, or
Yeah,
how much progress there is yet to be made. And it's like, let's just look at that honestly. Yeah.
yeah. And there's a few things about that. One, on for sure, on more of the political spectrum, I definitely agree that the conversations, I think, have to change. I think in more recent time, I consider myself just more so to just be a supporter of policies and not even necessarily parties, in certain ways, because it's gobbled up in ways where we perpetuate, I think, ideas in a way that makes it seem like, this side has to be the right side, or you're with us against us. And something really interesting about the word progressive is that, I'm not sure that everybody always thinks about what the progress actually looks like. Like you actually hinted, at your vision of it, which I can definitely see. But my question in response is always like, you know, progressing towards what? What is this thing that we are progressing towards? Now it's going to look different for everybody, but if we're just, moving through a narrative of this is how we're supposed to go because it's the, progressive thing, there's no real challenge to what you are doing. You're just kind of moving. So I definitely like that. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, secondly, I think you're right about like just really trying to evaluate um, what brings up things for us and what hits on different pain points, for people. And I think that can span beyond race, from the standpoint of um, we are still human and we're still animals. And I think that there's a very big component of how, like, we all kind of fundamentally are trying to feel safe in some way or another. So much human behavior is rooted in is just trying to find some means of safety. And I think that it takes a lot of emotional awareness to say, okay, I have to cool myself down to be able to hear something out. And I think that needs to be more universally applied, personally, because I think that's how you cut through more of the noise, and then you really, really see people and you really, really hear them. So yeah, I mean, I love all the things you're speaking toward. Um, so what's your relationship to the word vulnerability? What does that word mean to you, and how do you interact with it within your life?
Oh, yeah, that's a really important word. Like a lot of folks, I think I kind of fell in love with Brene Brown a few years ago, and so grateful for that body of work, to put it out there, and I think it's being applied in lots of different areas. Hold on a second.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's corporate settings or men's work or women's work or everything in between. And so to me, vulnerability has a lot to do with presence. It has a lot to do with really conveying what is happening for me in this moment at the most depth I can express. And so first of all, it takes an awareness, right, of well, what is happening to me, and then there's certainly a practice, and I'm always working on it. How can I express that? And to your point about safety, do I always feel safe expressing vulnerability,
Mm.
in all situations, and expressing, if I'm feeling triggered in the moment, based on the setting, maybe I feel like I just sort of have to swallow that and deal with that, or more of my dream for the world would be like where we, in just about any setting, we could say, wow,
Yeah.
this is what's happening to me right now. Like I just got triggered. I'm having trauma, and then there's the social emotional intelligence of doing that in a way, and hopefully being with people who have some similar capacity, maybe to hold space for that, and not, because I think sometimes people can jump into sort of fixing or defending. Some people might, if I express that I'm feeling a certain way, uh, like I said, either they might want to fix that, or they may somehow even feel like I'm actually saying I'm blaming them. I think
Right.
that
Yeah.
can come up a lot, right? And where could it just exist? Excuse me. Could it just exist where I'm just
Like
sharing.
stating.
I
Yeah.
am just stating what's happening to me right now, and nothing really does need to be done. Sometimes that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I could definitely resonate with that, and that I think is kind of tricky. And like you said, with that existing within different spaces, like I think about that all the time with regards to how just different like workspaces look. And now I've been working on building more and more relationships where that kind of communication is easier to have, but man, I wonder, what the world could and would look like if that was more of the universal basis, and maybe not even to expand it to the world, even if just within the US that was going on more. I think a lot of things will look a lot differently.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
One of the areas I've probably gotten into the most trouble is when I'm not direct with people, and that's
Mm,
especially true, I think, in romantic relationships,
mhm.
and why would I not be direct? Because I'm afraid of being vulnerable. I'm afraid of sharing what I feel. I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid of being judged. And there's all of these fears that come up, which again go back to what you were saying about safety. And um, it's interesting thinking about safety in the context of privilege, because
Mhm.
it's um, the human nervous system isn't like evaluating uh, how I stand in the world and how my
Yeah.
identities give me access to certain things. Now, but I think it's also important to recognize that, and this kind of gets in the area of like white fragility, is like feeling bad and having a trauma response are not the same things.
Mhm.
And there's so much trauma in the world. There's so many different flavors of it. And here we are a year and a half into a pandemic where I can't imagine anybody's escaped having some kind of trauma related to that. Not to equivocate whatsoever, because that's been layered on top of personal trauma and systemic trauma and everything else.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's a valid point. And that's actually something I've been um why I'm even more motivated to get this workout a lot sooner, is because I do feel like there are residual things, especially heading into winter months and everything, that there are residual just kind of issues that are unresolved with people, because that was, depending on what your experience was, that was a lot of isolation for everyone, and probably more than um what most have dealt with. And I had to look at that with my own like mental health, depression, other things like that. I had a weird time because I was in a certain period of therapy, like about a year and a half into therapy too. So things were really getting uncovered as well within that time. So it was a bit of a perfect storm for me. But I could definitely, just see that, yeah, it's just very real, effects. And yeah, being able to kind of move through the world or move through friend groups and circles differently, and being able to kind of speak to those things, I think can make a big difference. But just hopefully conversations like this are helping to do for us and for others, so
Yeah, and
go ahead.
well, yeah, it was just one of the things I was premeditating a little before this was just pondering. Well, I think about it a lot. It's just, what emotions does society kind of dictate that anybody can display?
Yeah.
And I very generally, I think there are some gendered versions of that. I think like I love the name of your work, how men
Yeah.
cry, right? Because I think for the most part, we're not encouraged to show that. We're not encouraged to show weakness, and that's more true than for some than others. And in some cases, and going back to my childhood, I think I'm in some ways almost a best case scenario because my mom was an early childhood specialist. So
Yeah.
whatever information did exist in the 80s and 90s about that stuff, she probably had some access to it. I don't remember. I mean, I had dolls, and I don't remember my dad ever um, talking badly about that or saying I shouldn't have dolls or anything like that. So, hopefully that maybe was part of the reason I'm on this path, because
Yeah.
I just have access to some of that. And at the same time, I don't. A lot of what I've been exploring in the last several years is my relationship with anger.
Hmm.
What is a healthy relationship or healthy expression of anger? Because that's one I don't feel safe expressing anger in most situations.
Yeah. Now, and that is really fascinating, by the way, of just having a parental structure, where things were kind of presented to you in that way. So, do you feel like you had a lot of um, maybe social pressure even outside of the way you were brought up in terms of some of the narratives, and it's probably can be hard to put your finger on, of course, because you're taking in inputs of all types throughout your life. But I guess the question would be, how do you feel like you um grew into your own sense of being a man, like with that kind of background, and then with the social pressure that you may have run into?
Yeah, it's a it's a good question. Hmm. One thing I've been doing. I think there's there's like deep healing work, and sometimes that feels a certain way, and it's
Hmm.
really kind of serious. And I also kind of look for areas of levity, and I've been going back and looking at some programming in the form of movies and media and
Yeah.
TV shows. And I think that is some of the most powerful social programming because we're all looking at it and then we deepen it, right? Because then we like have our conversation around the water cooler with our friends or whatever, and we're like, "Oh, did you see the latest James Bond movie?"
Yeah.
And I was never really into sports, so I avoided that stereotypical locker room culture in a way.
Hmm.
So maybe that helped, but I also think there's things about sports that help people get in touch with their bodies in a way. And I think part of my challenge is a disembodiment. And so a lot of my work now is like, oh, how can I get out of my head? How can I be more in my body?
Hmm.
And well, I wouldn't be careful not to separate those because I think the head is
No,
part of the body, but
sure.
hopefully what I mean. Just let's say a more full expression of the body because that's where emotions live and that's where the trauma lives. And just unpacking that I think is really important. So, but yeah, I mean, gosh, you don't have to look that far. Just, some of the movies that I grew up with hold up and some don't,
Yeah.
it's actually really funny. For some reason, I never saw 16 Candles, but I was a huge John Hughes fan. I saw every other movie, but,
Yeah.
and I watched that recently, and I was just like appalled. I mean, it's that one in particular is really not good in terms of basically, demonstrating rape culture.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a piece of it. I think, again, like, a lot of this, a lot of what I feel like I hear, and maybe this is my projection right now, is kind of blaming folks for how they were programmed
Hmm.
on all different levels. And I'd rather have a conversation about the programming. I'd rather have a conversation that says,
Yeah.
wow, I grew up with Han Solo and James Bond, and look at how they treat women.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you speaking to that and making that point as well, because I mean, as I realize it now, like I grew up mostly, listening to hip hop or like certain artists and other things. I don't like to because I make music as well, so I don't like to demonize certain genres, but I literally find it now that I can't even really enjoy certain thing like the way that I used to be able to enjoy things before. It's like when I actually sit down, and I'm mostly, writer, lyricist, so I'm very lyric focused. Like it's to the point where I can't really play like background music and work. Like if I'm doing something, I can't really do it because my ear is like tuned to what people are saying the whole time. So now, as I go back to listen to certain music, I'm like, if you were to write this out on a page and read it, and again, it's not to shame anybody's, expression of it, but there is just like sometimes just like palpable things of like, this is just super violent. And I think like some of the imagery, and in particular, like some of the cultural things that I bumped into, is just like violence on violence on violence on violence, whether that's towards others, towards women, towards self. And it's really hard to not that's been some of my personal most difficult work. I think it's like really trying to walk back how strong those influences are, because you're right. It's like, you may have been 10 years old and seeing some of these movies, and that stuff is just like subconsciously seeping in. And it definitely pours into how we end up presenting into the world. So yeah, thanks for just for sharing that. Because yeah, it's just a wild journey. um but yeah, I have a few more kind of thought questions for you. So one of them, when I talk about, and this is kind of in the vein of what I was just speaking on, actually, when you talked about anger before, like one of the meanings behind how men cry is not just talking about physical tears. It's talking about the different potential pathways that men can cry out. Sometimes that's in healthy forms, that's in unhealthy forms. But would you be comfortable sharing a story of either a time that you cried, or a time that maybe a habit of means of crying out that you've witnessed within yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I don't cry very much, and I don't want to go into like a shame spiral about that. But and at the same time, I feel like I hope I do cry more someday. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll put it that way, because I think it's an incredibly valuable expression. I was actually even I love it when science can kind of back things up or explain things. And
Yeah.
I even saw a thing the other day that was there's research being done on the qualities of tears, like
Mm,
that certain toxins and hormones are actually being released in our tears,
yeah.
and as a way to flush the system, as a way to heal and to accommodate, so
Mm.
I I can I even remember the last time I cried? I feel like the time I remember crying now is I don't know, like at the end of sappy movies, like
Mm,
the tear jerkers. They know the equation, to do that, and like that's what when it gets pulled out. Um, if I have a slightly broader interpretation of crying out, I feel like I think that's probably why I'm investigating anger, because
mhm.
to me there's always something underneath anger, like like there's fear or sadness or something deeper. And so that's probably the the way I would say that right now is like sometimes I notice when I just have a huge, ball of anger kind of swelling up. Yeah, there's probably something underneath that, and it might be
Yeah.
sadness that's not being expressed.
Yeah, and that I think is powerful, definitely, because actually I was having a conversation with Audrey, and that's one of the things that she brought up. Is she's like, that's actually one of the only emotions that typically is presented for men to be able to show. Nobody really cares too much. I mean, people care, but I just mean like socially, that is relatively acceptable for anger slash aggression. I'll kind of throw that into a similar pool, is like that's perfectly fine, especially through a lens of sports or through a lens of business or whatever it is. Like that's fine. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because again, that's another one that I definitely have had to and continue to look into myself.
Well, yeah, and earlier I said I don't always feel safe expressing anger, and so I consider myself an empath, or
Hmm.
somebody who's energetically sensitive, and I can really sense the energy and the emotions of people around me, and so I think that's one of the reasons I don't feel safe expressing anger, even if, like, yeah, for the most part, society may have deemed that as one thing that men can express, but I feel like I'll feel the mirror of how it influences people around me,
Mm,
and therefore, yeah, it's a strange, like, feedback loop.
yeah, no, for sure. Now this question, it's one of the closing ones, but I'm in particular very excited to actually ask you about it, because I'm genuinely curious, and it is, you know, what do you feel like the world needs more of from men?
That is a good question. Hopefully I just demonstrated it. Really, just pausing for a moment.
Mm,
I feel like one of the traps for men is there's certainly a stereotype that we love to fix everything.
mm,
Certainly, in a lot of situations, we are overpowering with our voice and our privilege, and our, in many cases, our physical presence. Um, so I think really just walking through the world a bit more gently, taking that time, using that power to make more space, and there's just so much that can happen if we just take a beat, maybe before we respond, especially if we're triggered, or that's going to allow more other voices to come into the room that otherwise might feel that they didn't have any space if we're doing all the talking. So yeah, just making space.
yeah, no, I love that. And then to kind of flip that question a bit, how does the world help men to get there?
I don't hear. I mean, it's certainly in men's groups and the circles I swim in, it's fairly common to talk about healing.
Hmm.
Um, but because there's so much trauma and so much wounding and so much misbehavior, uh, uh, and harm, uh, it's really challenging, I think, because you know how can we expect folks who are kind of navigating the other end of that to make a lot of space for healing,
Yeah.
and I think the world, certainly in America and most of the world, is designed to center men, and I feel like, though, in some cases, men aren't actually really getting the healing that's needed. There's a lot of emotional labor done on behalf of men, but in a lot of cases, I think that's sort of absorbing anger, or sort of
Hmm.
navigating around men, not necessarily actually providing the healing, the deep healing and support that men need. I can't quote statistics, but I believe it's true that, um, I think something like about half as many boys are sexually assaulted
Hmm.
as girls, um, but boys and men are even less likely to talk about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, you know, I think it would be wonderful if that was more of the discussion, that we were looking not just at a behavior or not just even at an impact. We need to look at those things. I'm not saying like we need to let people off the hook we need to hold people accountable 100%. And let's look at the root of that behavior. Let's really see what it is going to take to provide healing.
Yeah. No, I thank you for both of those, for all of the responses, and just for the very rich conversation. I think there was just a lot that just came out of this, and I really appreciate just all of the different insight that you provided, and also beyond that, even just the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. I think it's really powerful and very, very needed, for so many within the community. So I just want to thank you again for just sharing all that wisdom, and just also sharing your time here and all the conversation. So.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this work. There's so many, when you ask what men need, I think you're providing a lot of it through this format and through this medium. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'll tell you, this is just, it's been very transformative for me though. I mean, like every conversation, I have to say selfishly that there's so much that, I'm able to kind of soak in and reflect on. So, I'm just joyed for everything that's starting to happen with it. So yeah, very, very much appreciate it. Are there any places that you want to leave for the folks at home to follow you on, or anything like that? Any shameless plugs you want to drop?
Sure. Just, I guess, a couple websites. You can find me. My own website is andyswindler.com. And that's in particular, that's where I do a lot of writing around my own journey through a lot of things we talked about today as a straight white man in America, and racial justice, and also some of the themes that we picked up. And then, as I mentioned, my startup, feelreal.net, you can check out. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, well, you have an amazing rest of your day, Andy, and I'm sure we'll connect more. Audrey and I, you're on the list of individuals for us to kind of reach back out to and have some further chats about. So we'll be in touch for sure. And yeah, just thank you again for the time. And for any of the listeners, if you want to find out more about How Men Cry, you can visit howmencry.com, or the How Men Cry on IG or any of the social media platforms to learn how to submit stories and become part of this conversation. So yeah, thank you again, Andy, and I'm gonna boot us both out of this room, but
okay, thanks so much.
You.
See you soon. Bye.
For sure. Take care.
Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love.